Today's video is brought to you by Squarespace. Let's talk about that project you've been holding off on for far too long. You know the one, that comprehensive gallery of pizza-themed underwear. Or maybe you're trying to sell some pizza-themed underwear and you need an online storefront. Or perhaps you need to put a menu online for your local restaurant which sells underwear-themed pizza. What am I talking about? Okay, maybe your ambitions aren't quite that weird, or maybe they are. Either way, this is where our friends at Squarespace come in. I've personally always been intimidated at the idea of getting my own domain and my own little slice of the internet, but it took me just a handful of minutes to get down the basics once I checked out Squarespace myself. It really is that easy. They walk you through everything. And after that, it was just super fun customizing everything to my heart's content. Heck, if you already have a domain name, you could just transfer it over with their easy-to-use tools and do whatever you want with it. And if you're wanting to take whatever project you're working on seriously, the tools to track your growth, put together your own ad campaigns, integrate with social media platforms, everything you need to be a functioning business is right here and just as easy to understand. It's very little effort to get something clean and professional up in front of the world. Trust me, nothing feels quite as cool as having your own domain on a business card. And to make it even easier, if you head over to squarespace.com/gameapologist, you will get 10% off your first purchase. Thank you again to Squarespace for supporting the channel, and let's get back to it. Welcome back to Sonic Speed. This is Sonic Speed Reading. We're going to talk about a Sonic comic. You know, when I started this series, the goal was to just make sense of all the different Sonic comic continuities. And while I've mostly been covering the IDW series, the ultimate goal was to properly catalog and explain the Archie series. Because yeah, there are a lot of infamous moments that circulate around on the internet without context, but it's also the longest running video game comic book ever created. I wasn't a Gargantuan fan as a kid, even though I did read it every single month for a long time. I was always frustrated at the lack of game elements, and truth be told, I wasn't a huge fan of any of the American characters for a good long while. But at the same time, I do think there's merit to some of these stories, and after reading some of the later issues after Ian Flynn took over, I did appreciate a lot of these characters and other elements that I found myself actually missing now that they're gone. And as fanfiction-y as it could get on occasion on the back half of the run, that's also where I feel some of the best stories ever told in the franchise exist. And in the right hands, all of these disparate pieces can come together and work together beautifully. There is a lot to love in Archie Sonic. But Sonic Live is not one of those things. I don't have any particular reason to talk about this book right now. As of this recording, I haven't even gotten into Archie Sonic properly, but I promise you, whether or not you're familiar with this continuity, it doesn't make a difference. Because nothing that happens in this story makes any sense. I still remember the very first time I saw this cover. I was a wee little baby, and they were previewing it at the end of one of their other Sonic comics. And I still remember the very first thing I thought when I saw this image. Why? I don't know about you, but when I see a title of something followed by the word live, I usually associate that with a stage show that's happening right in front of you. Because that's what you use the word live for. What was this supposed to be? Is this a promotion for a show I had never heard of? Or maybe this comic would be an adaptation of a stage show. Turns out it's neither of those things, and I would later find out there were indeed Sonic stage shows I was completely oblivious to. Missed my chance to hug Sally Acorn, but that's fine. Some dreams are meant to just stay dreams. Sonic Live is not a live show whatsoever. It is instead referring to Sonic interacting with their interpretation of the real world. This was pitched as a story where you could insert yourself, a real child, into an actual adventure with Sonic the Hedgehog. I have always hated stories like that. It's pandering, it's corny, and I would not be surprised if Sonic Live instilled that deep-seated hatred in me, because this is hands down the worst Sonic story I have ever read. And yet, for some reason, even remembering this sounded stupid as a kid, I still ended up buying the thing. And to this day, I have no idea why. Because just look at this cover. This is insane. We have Sonic here crawling out of a TV like he's Sadako, which makes sense because, you know, they both like rings, I guess. And also, everything in this book feels cursed as hell. I'm I'm probably gonna die 7 days after reading this. And now you probably all will too, sorry about that. And just look at his giant ass hamburger helper mitts grabbing onto that child. Look how big those stupid clown hands are. He could crush that child's skull in the palm of his hand. Now obviously the live is referring to Sonic interacting with the real world. And the actual name of the story itself, The Last Game Cartridge Hero, which outside of being a lazy and very late reference to Last Action Hero, does also serve the purpose of selling you the premise. What if Sonic came to life from one of his video games and hopped out into the real world, letting you be a part of one of his adventures? Which is kinda corny, but it's not remotely uncommon, not even back then. I mean, Tron was a whole thing, and Nintendo themselves did this all the time with their comics and cartoons years before this was published. It makes sense, video games are an interactive medium. This supplemental material is ultimately here to help sell the video games, and it really helped make products feel larger than life. But with that in mind, you might notice something rather crucial missing from this cover. There is not a single Sega product to be seen anywhere here. In fact, they are not seen anywhere in this story. What you can see though, right next to Sonic's eye, is a very familiar logo. Yeah, that's a Sony VCR on the cover of a Sonic comic book. Yeah, it's a bit out of focus, you're not gonna notice it immediately, but this was 1996. These were the days where Nintendo was no longer the biggest problem Sega had. It was Sony, the company that single-handedly kicked Sega out of the console hardware war. And you can't even say this kid is reaching for a video game. Those are music CDs. Yes, the Saturn was out at that time, and yes, it is a CD-based console, but here in the West, they came in giant jewel cases. You may feel I'm being a little bit too nitpicky, but just bear with me, and I will provide even further context as we make our way through the story because, again, we haven't even started. As you turn the page, you're given the credits for everyone who's worked on the book, and yes, this story is written and drawn by the infamous Ken Penders. We have 2 follow-up stories from there that are much easier to comprehend, but I will give Ken this much. Every one of these special edition Sonic comics would kick off with a few paragraphs of introduction on the credits page. They're melodramatic, they're corny, but they get you up to speed if you're unfamiliar with this canon, because it is a very different beast from the video games, and all these years later, with all the different continuities out there, maybe this is helpful for somebody. I don't know. All they're explaining here is that on planet Mobius, there's good and evil, represented by Sonic and Robotnik, and Sonic has dicked around in other realities, which is important to the story, but I don't think I need to explain multiverse to anybody in 2023. So let's move on to the story itself, which starts off with Robotnik on top of a tower, with lightning crackling through the sky, setting a dramatic background. He's calling out Sonic, saying they need to have it out for one final time. As we see Sonic rush into the fortress, I wonder what kind of crazy traps and, never mind, he is on top of the roof in the next panel. I also love that this fortress has all the flair you'd expect from a big final boss lair, with a giant skull insignia, jutting edges, elaborate patterns, flaming torches, but it looks like Sonic is just rushing into an elevator and then it's just kicking down a generic door. But anyway, yeah, Sonic looks furious, and Robotnik greets him with a smile and presents him with Sally Acorn, who's wearing some kind of mind control helmet, I guess. And if you're unfamiliar with that walking scrotum behind them, that's Snively, Robotnik's lackey that was very prominent in the Western side of things. Just standing there, smiling, looking like a real creep. And hey, if you are familiar with the Western canons, and you're wondering why Robotnik has placed a mind control helmet on Sally instead of just flat out roboticizing her, since that was kind of his whole thing, well, your guess is as good as mine, and it will make less sense as the story goes on. And don't let this scenario fool you. We're not jumping in at the end of a crazy story arc. There's been no build up to whatever's happened to lead to this particular situation. We're just here. And before Sonic can do anything to save the princess, trapdoors open up to reveal SWATbots who surround Sonic. Now, Sonic has defeated plenty of these things before, so he should have no problem taking care of them, especially since Robotnik is taking so much time talking crap and telling him to ready, aim, and well, never mind, they shoot him. He's dead. Sonic's dead. Sorry, everybody. Yep, 3 pages in and they just kill Sonic in the most generic way possible. But as we move to the next page, we see we are now in live action with 2 children sitting in front of a television set. This is Steve and Jesse, and Steve has just lost another game of Sonic, which I guess is what that scenario was supposed to represent. And just hang on, I know you guys see it. We'll talk about it in a second. Let's just get through the page first. They're both getting yelled at by their mom, saying enough video games, they're gonna be late for school. And with their backs turned as they head out the door, a hand comes out of the television set. Now, before we move on with the rest of the story, I really need to talk about this page. This, kids, right here is the live part of Sonic Live. There is one more panel of the live action world at the very end of the story, but between this page and that last panel, none of the rest of it takes place in the live action world. And you know what? Maybe we're all the better for it, because these photos make me deeply uncomfortable. They're poorly lit and they're poorly shot. This clearly wasn't done on a professional level. Somebody just grabbed a Polaroid and just took a couple shots. And I'm not even sure if the kids are actually in that room on that last panel here. The lighting's so weird here. But whether or not they're actually in the room, they just look dead. Look at those soulless eyes. There's just no emotion on their faces whatsoever. They're supposed to be rushing off to school, and that girl does not look like she gives a single damn about whatever is happening here. But of course, that's not the most ridiculous thing I need to talk about on this page. Now, if you're a Sonic fan, I'm sure a few things have popped up in your mind when I said that Sonic dying on the previous page is meant to represent something that happens in a video game. You might be asking yourself, what Sonic game has anything resembling that scenario we just saw? Furthermore, what video game turns off a television set when you die? Well, probably a game you play with a TV remote control. Yeah, that's what the kid is holding in his hand. They're trying to pass that off as a Genesis controller. How? How do you think you can get away with this? You could see that clear as day. You couldn't even just hide it? Now, as silly as this is, you have to then ask yourself, well, wait a minute. Does that mean that the people who are putting together this Sonic the Hedgehog comic book do not have access to Sonic the Hedgehog video games? I'm 4 pages into this. What? We turn our attention back to Sonic, who finds himself trapped in the Matrix, or cyberspace, I guess. Ken, you gonna sue for that one too, buddy? But yeah, this is where Sonic ended up after he got blasted. There is no explanation for this. He is just here instead of being dead. I think maybe they try to explain what's happening in a very confusing fashion, but like, we'll get there when we get there. But all you need to know for right now is Sonic is stuck in this in-between world. We turn our attention back to Robotnik, still cheering over the death of Sonic, and now that he has the Hedgehog out of the way, he turns his attention back to Sally, who he takes to a prison cell, where we see he has captured the other freedom fighters, who do not have mind control helmets on. So, let's break this down, alright? Robotnik is known for robotization. He takes living creatures, shoves them in a machine, and they come out as robot slaves. That is how he conquered this world. So not only has he not done that to Sally, he hasn't done that to any other freedom fighter. And if that wasn't weird enough, he does have a method of control on Sally, but then decides to just stick her in a prison cell. Just what? Why? And no, again, they don't ever explain this. I don't know why any of this is here. The best I can muster, considering how creepy Ken is with Sally throughout the entirety of Archie, my only assumptions are dark ones. And Ken, buddy, all I can tell you is, I get it. I'm sorry. Oh, Scott. No, but for real, Ken's real creepy with this character. Maybe he truly is the #1 simp monk. But yeah, let's turn our attention back to Sonic, who is still stuck in this green void with weird techno stuff in the background there. He hears a voice coming from somewhere saying, oh boy, we're finally home. I thought school would never end. He peers into an opening and sees Steve playing with a Genesis controller this time, saying, I think I have the last trap figured out. In just a second, I'll punch in the codes and. So like, if you haven't figured out by now, I think it's pretty clear that Ken hasn't played the Sonic games. But to give him the benefit of the doubt, maybe he was putting a level select code in because Sonic 1 and 2 don't have save files. I don't know, but Steve looks a little confused as he realizes that Sonic is not reacting as he usually does on the screen. Jesse calls Steve a dummy, saying he has a videotape on instead. And again, to be fair, he was playing with a remote, so that's a possibility. But Steve says he never touched the VCR. Maybe it has it on the wrong channel. But Sonic says, don't touch that dial. I need help getting out of here. And to get out, he kidnaps the children, drags him into his digital purgatory. And I don't know if I need to tell you this, but that is not getting out. He abducts children, and I don't know why. There's no reason for it. But the kids don't seem to mind it, and then when they ask where they are, Sonic gives them this explanation, and I'm just gonna read it to you verbatim. He says, the closest I can figure is some sort of in-between zone. We're somewhere between where I come from and where you do. The surrounding energy surged to the point where I was able to make contact with you. Now, the energy surges are coalescing at another point, and since you've arrived, the surges have grown stronger. Now, I don't know about you, but that doesn't sound like anything Sonic would ever say. I don't know. Tails, Rotor, sure. But I guess this is the comic trying its best to explain to us why Sonic had to grab children out of the real world. Apparently, with them now in this zone, those energy portals are growing stronger, I guess. I don't know why any of this works the way it does, but hey, maybe that's just part of the mystery. Let's keep going and find out. We turn our attention back to Robotnik and Snively, both of them standing next to a rocket as SWAT bots drag out the Freedom Fighters. And instead of mind control helmets, or robotization, or just flat out killing them, he instead carefully details his plan to his enemies. Apparently, this rocket is a missile, and it's going to send out a network of killer satellites in orbit around Mobius. And he's going to throw the Freedom Fighters in there as well, sending them off to space to die. And you know what? I kinda get it. He just killed Sonic. He's going to savor the rest of his victories. But again, I don't understand why Sally is separated from this group, because she's not here. Robotnik explains that she's in the rocket's lower level. And as he's about to explain what's going to happen to her, Sonic and the kids arrive. And that is where they drop that particular thread. They never explain what his plans were with Sally. But don't you worry, we still have other storylines that get nice and muddled before the end of this. Anyway, like I was saying, Sonic knocks a SWAT bot over a ledge and then immediately gets the two children kidnapped. Why? What was the game plan, Sonic? SWAT bots grab the kids and Robotnik threatens to blast them, to which Sonic says, not if I pull them out of the way before the bot beams start blasting. Of course, if you'll recall, just about 5 pages earlier, Sonic was incapable of moving out of the way of blasters, and that would be a good enough explanation from Robotnik, but he instead says, by your definition, I'm the villain. That means I'm capable of any sick, twisted, evil deed. The sicker, the better. Take him. He just explains what a villain is, and that's enough for Sonic to be like, oh, I guess you're right, good point. So SWAT bots grab Sonic, and he says, you harm one hair on their heads. But Robotnik interrupts him, saying, yo, what? You're in no position to demand anything. However, to put you at ease, it's really the hair on your head that I wish to harm. And then he plucks a quill off of Sonic, snaps it in half as he laughs maniacally. I can't look at this panel. Why does nobody talk about that panel? It is the funniest thing I have ever seen. This is the most insane thing. Look at he's just losing his mind, snapping a quill. Oh god. Oh no. This book's so stupid. So yeah, from there, Sonic manages to drag the two SWAT bots that are holding him as he headbutts Robotnik and then proceeds to take out the two robots holding him down. Because consistency just doesn't mean anything. Who cares? He grabs the two kids and they go running off towards a control room where Sonic says, now that we're in the control room, we have to make like instant archaeologists. And when Jesse says, I don't understand, because who does? I don't understand. He then explains, that's a countdown underway, Jesse. We have to decipher the hieroglyphics and press the right switch. Like the walk you have to make for that joke, and it still doesn't make any sense. Couldn't go with like a technician or an engineer. We go with an archaeologist. Have some fossils you need digging up? Just grab yourself a pack of instant archaeologists and add water. Or milk if you want them a little extra creamy. Anyway, I guess Robotnik fell on his own remote, which activates the rocket, and Sonic zips around the control room, trying to figure out what button to press to stop the launch. He eventually decides that the best he can guess is one of 3 buttons. I don't know how he came to that conclusion, but apparently it is one of those 3. Meanwhile, outside, Robotnik ponders to himself how Sonic came back to life, and then he turns his head to see a sparkling, glowing portal and thinks to himself, oh, maybe he came from there. So he and Snively enter the portal as Sonic, of course, clicks the right random button, as the kids continue to stand around being completely useless. As they leave the rocket, they too see the big glowing portal, which now, for some reason unbeknownst to me, now has a gravitational pull as it sucks all 3 characters within. The 3 find themselves in, I assume, another dimension, and face to face with Robotnik and Snively. And the 2 kids? And the 2 kids, for some reason, have a slightly different art style to them. They even pointed out in the comic, with Steve saying that Jessie looks like something out of one of her Speed Rider cartoons. I think this is meant to imply that they're supposed to look a little more anime-ish now. As for why, I don't know. This is still Ken drawing this. Robotnik and Sonic start talking crap again, and once again, Sonic is surrounded by a bunch of SWAT bots and taken prisoner. Sonic asks, what's the deal, Schlemiel? Man, I missed your writing, Ken, so much. He says, even you couldn't have come up with this setup by yourself, even though Robotnik has surrounded him with SWAT bots twice over in this one comic book and killed him the first time he did it. I'm being a bit of a smartass here. I'm going to assume that Sonic means, how did Robotnik get all of these SWAT bots here, and how does he have a giant tower behind him as they just entered the portal? I'm doing my best to meet you halfway here, Ken. Robotnik, again, never learning his lesson, decides to explain everything going on to his greatest enemy, as he walks them inside, explaining that he and multiple versions of himself have come together to create this giant Robotnik mech. And to be completely fair, giant Eggman mechs are a fairly common occurrence when it comes to Sonic video games. But it is slightly annoying if these are indeed multiversal Robotniks, we didn't get to see the video game version or the Adventures of version. In fact, they all just seem to be robotic variations of this Robotnik, which is a little weird. But anyway, Robotnik throws Sonic and the 2 kids into a prison cell, where they meet 2 other humans named Jerry and Maury. But before we can find out what their deal is, we turn our attention back to Robotnik. He and Snively are standing in front of a model of Mobius, or it might actually be Mobius itself. Kind of hard to say. Regardless, Robotnik explains that this is Mobius. Somehow, those strange creatures built a multi-dimensional portal to our world in the act of creating so-called entertainment. A device so powerful, it can make me master of all universes. But just then, he is betrayed by his robotic doppelgangers or multi-dimensional counterparts. I don't really know. But before we turn our attention back to Sonic, I have to ask, when Robotnik says strange creatures, he is obviously referring to the human beings he has trapped in that prison cell. And I'm Oh boy. So never mind the fact that Robotnik himself is human. You can't even use the excuse that everyone else on Mobius is a furry animal critter compared to Robotnik, because there are other human beings on that planet. This story was published just a few months before the Endgame arc, which introduced us to the idea of Overlanders, which is what they call the humans on Mobius. This is a little nitpicky, it's just such a strange choice to have Robotnik see other people as strange creatures. But hey, don't you worry, it gets far weirder from there, because we turn our attention back to Sonic and all the human beings, strange creatures, as they explain to Sonic that he is not real. The 2 random dudes here explain, in our world, you're just a character in a game cartridge. They go on to explain that one of our staff artists did a series of sketches and you were the result. Or at least that's what they were told until they found out different. Apparently, the sketches were based on transmissions received over a prototype device. So what this comic book is saying, from what I understand, is that Sega had a prototype device that could see into other dimensions, and they decided And they decided to make a video game mascot with this wild technology. And I have to wonder, like, of everybody for Sonic to meet from the real world, who are these two random dudes? Were these like Sega reps that Archie worked with? Because if they are, good job. And just the blatant disrespect to Naoto Oishima is astounding here. One of our staff artists did a series of sketches, and not only do they just call him a staff artist, they say he stole all of the designs from a transmission from a prototype device. And Sonic's handling all of this information just fine, I guess. But for real, if you know who these two people are supposed to be, let me know in the comments. I'm sure it wouldn't take that much effort to do a bit of research, but I can't. Look, I barely want to even finish reading this comic book, so I'm not gonna bother. But yeah, as they're all talking, Robotnik shows up in front of the prison door and blows it up, only to rip off his face to reveal a woman. Apparently, this lady is just wearing a costume. She was out promoting the latest Sonic game when a freak electrical storm somehow created a link between dimensions through the prototype. Again, Robotnik has never looked like that in the games, so I don't know why they have a costume that looks like that, and I don't even know how did she blow up the door? How did she blow up the door? You know, it doesn't matter. Anyway, one of these random dudes says whoever runs this place sees the device and connected it to their systems. And then Steve, remember, they're children here for some reason, points out to Sonic that the robot Robotniks are about to zap the real Robotnik. And again, are these other versions of Robotnik? Are all other versions of him robots? Because, like, we've had... because we've had multi-dimensional Robotniks in this series before, so why wouldn't they show back? Why wouldn't they show back up? Why aren't there other versions of Sonic? We've had that intro. Oh, God. Anyway, Sonic, being the idiot that he is, saves Robotnik and Snively from getting zapped. Which, hey, he's a hero. I get it. Kind of weird that he could drag Robotnik out of the way of being fired, but couldn't save himself in this same comic, but fine. Whatever. The SWAT bots then take aim at Sonic and all the humans, but the blonde dude says if they can shut down the prototype, it'll pull the plug on the whole system. And when Sonic asks, how do they do that? He points over to a giant Genesis controller and says they need to punch in the access code. It's an access code to one of the Sonic games. And here, finally, at the end of the story, one of the two children proved to be useful. As Steve says he knows the codes, so he latches onto Sonic, who speeds them over to the controller, where they punch in up, down, left, right, hold A, and press start. And you know what? I will give the comic this much. They at least put in a code from a Sonic game. But that said, if they do have a Sega employee on hand who does know that you need to punch in a code on a Genesis controller, I think it's fairly safe to assume if he knew you needed to punch a code in, he probably also knows the code. But hey, one of the kids got to do something and it works. It shuts down all of the robots, and after congratulating each other, the two dudes with all the answers explain that Sonic should be able to go back to his home dimension if they reverse the process, which I don't know what that means, maybe punching in the code again, but unfortunately it'll be a one-way ticket. I don't know how they know that. That's far down the list of questions I have so far, so I'm not worried about it. Anyway, Sonic hugs the kids, looks real weird while doing it, and then they send him, Robotnik, and Snively back to Mobius, where Sally, now free from the helmet, and Tails greet Sonic. And again, just really weird. Sonic just has his thumb on Sally's lip, and when he asks her how she's feeling, she says, I feel like someone pressed pause on me. And Tails just pointing at her and giving a wink to the phone. She's just winking at the reader, which I know is supposed to be like, you get it? Like a video game? But like, there's just so many dark implications. How's that for meta era, kid? Oh my God. Oh man, I'm gonna have to take a shower after reading this. I feel so gross. This is so bad. Anyway, yeah, the story ends on one more picture of the kids sitting in front of a TV screen with Steve excitedly saying, it's the new Sonic game cartridge. Of course, again, nothing on the screen, so I don't know what he's playing. But yeah, guys, that's where Sonic Live ends. We never find out who put together that prototype machine in this alternate dimension. We never figure out how Sonic was saved at the last minute from being blasted to death. Was that strange electrical storm that dragged everybody to that one particular place the same one that saved him? Because there was an electric storm in that fight with Robotnik. There's a backup story featuring the substitute freedom fighters that shows what was going on during Sonic's weird adventure with children, but that does not explain anything whatsoever. But the editor does take a moment to explain what's going on with the kids. He says that the child actors were none other than Ken Pender's son, Steven, and his niece, Jessica. Ken asked them for their help when he started on the project. He knew he would need to spend hours with them making sure each photograph was just the way he wanted. Again, remember, one of those carefully taken photos that he spent hours getting together shows his son pretending to play a Sonic game with a TV remote every single time in front of a blank television set. Good God. Oh boy. Look, we will talk about the Substitute Freedom Fighters when necessary, and we'll also talk about the Knuckles backup story at a different time when we cover the ongoing story with him, but I will say I did enjoy both of those much more than the actual Sonic Live story. Because again, keep in mind, even though they say it's a 48-page special, only half of the story is dedicated to what's on the cover, and thank goodness for that, because this was a complete nightmare to read. This made no sense to me as a kid, and it makes only a little more sense as an adult. And again, I'm inferring a lot here. It's very messy, it's all over the place. Having kids here made no sense whatsoever, and anything interesting they could have done with multiversal stuff is completely wasted. And it probably comes as no surprise to learn that most other Archie fans consider this to be the absolute worst comic in the entire run. In terms of storytelling, I think it might be the absolute worst, but there are a couple I would consider far more painful to read altogether, but we'll talk about those another time. But all that said, as easy as it is to bag on this and Ken Penders, goodness knows that's a favorite pastime of us in the Sonic fanbase, I still remember this one interview I saw him in while I was doing research for something. Who can say at this point? I don't remember, but I do remember that hanging up behind him in his office was a framed Sonic comic, and it was, you guessed it, Sonic Live. And while that seemed incredibly silly at first, remember, this story features his son, and as he's explained many times in interviews over the years, the very reason he took on the job for writing Sonic the Hedgehog comics to begin with was because his son was a massive fan. Yes, I know he got very weird with Knuckles and everything else and all the legal drama. There's no denying any of that. But just seeing that framed on his wall just showed me a dad who loves his son, and despite everything else, I found that to be very sweet. Wasn't a great comic, and Ken went on to do a lot of damage to the brand in many different ways, though I would argue Sega could probably do something about some of those characters that they never use anymore. But hey, a dad managed to get a story published with his son sharing an adventure with one of his favorite characters. And despite everything else, I think that reason alone justifies the existence of this weird little comic. Of course, the Sally thing's still very weird, but you know, whatever. I get it. Anyway, that's gonna do it for today, guys. Thank you so much for joining me on this weird, wild trip. It's time I finally finish up that Frontiers video I keep promising you, so I'm gonna get back to work on that. Appreciate everybody sticking around for this entire video, and I want to give an extra special shout out to the patrons who support the channel. Kyle Winter, Cirrus the Skeptic, Joseph Duncan Sonic 2 Blue, John, Josh Strider, Ken Monroe, Faizan Razul, Hatsworth, Tiny Jericho, Jack of All Spades, Tristan Trapp, Meekers, Dun Dun, Quote Resident Fanboy, Miles the Prower, Jeremy Singer, Mr. Boojay, World's Greatest Bard, Sam Webster, Dwight Graham, Fishflop, Lucas Lipker, The Bad Pal, Jonathan Dobbs, Cloverhood, Mr. Dr. SP, Dr. Pending, Cecil the Glade, The Dark Neon, Stefan Platonica, 3 Monic, Graham J. Hall, Lenny X, Wayne is Boss, Jamie Chevalier, Lederick, Roses are red, Violets are blue, Game Apologist is green, and if you don't subscribe to his Patreon, then David 20 Covers is going. Oh, I guess he's just going. Jimmy Duke STR, the Lumberjack. Today's video isn't sponsored by Raycon brand wireless earbuds featuring 10 hours of battery life and a 30-foot Bluetooth range. NBTV, Mute, Trash Baphomet, Autumn from Twitter.com. That Pyromane has finally returned to inform Mr. Nick that one of the main countries in Xenoblade 2 is a turtle named Genbu? Oh no, I have to play Xenoblade now. Like, unironically, I will play an entire video game just to get to know a game turtle. I love turtles so much. Jin Seotame, Nezend, Enerjack 5, Grayson Coniger, Spades the Nocturne, Ken K, Ven 101, Paxton Bisbee, Darren 7, Stevie Cole, Where's Arnold, 3 Rule 4, Wylord, A Seer Warns of a Deadly Fate, Paisley, Eric Delgado, Cody Gracius, Kodinsky, Jamo Art. Surprised none of your Sallys had that weird helmet on, Jamo. No, but for real though, the black-haired Sally is totally badass. I love that design so much. I got a lot of amazing artists and musicians supporting me. You guys are incredible. And let's continue with these incredible people. PK Durbar, Crimson Rose, Give Up Your Children, Separate, Sonic PAJ, Municent, Zagard Lagan. Just reiterating, this video isn't sponsored by Raycon brand earbuds, and you shouldn't visit buyraycon.com and enter code BOOJ. Roxas the Cat, Godzilla, Makuta of Salt, Gleam the Anomaly, Alexander Watson, Calais Presley, Native Nerd 27, Neil Gampa, Conan Kudo, Sharif Pi, Aeon 3 Valafor, My Man Zubair, Tenric Terror, and Butt Sets. Again, SECTS YouTube. Don't you dare censor me. Man, so many amazing people. Thank you so much for your support, guys. And I'm really missing a lot of you guys too. I need to hang out a little bit more on our voice calls over on the Discord server. Yeah, once I get this Frontiers video out, let's figure some fun thing to do. Need another movie night. Definitely need another movie night. Need to do that more often. Anyway, yeah, I'm now gonna get immediately to work on editing this video, so I will catch you all later. Toot toot, instant archaeologists.